Hello and welcome to episode 6 of season 3 of Free Speech, the Naturally United podcast, where we share topics pertaining to the environment, space, and beyond. And before I get into the video today, I do want to address the idea that the first episode of this season was about the coronavirus. This was as we were just learning about it, as we looked into what was happening in Wuhan, and this is before it spread to other countries, or at least to our knowledge spread to other countries. So since that time, there has been a massive surge in the number of cases as well as the number of deaths that have been caused by the coronavirus. So first of all, I'd like to make it clear that the original video was just meant to kind of summarize what was going on at that time, and that the last episode of this season, so episode 10 of season 3 of Free Speech, we will also dedicate to the coronavirus, updating you guys on our perspective of what's happened as well as the analytical and empirical research about what's being done and what to expect. And obviously there's a ridiculous amount of uncertainty surrounding it simply because of the number of nuances that are involved. But I'm going to do my best to be an objective learner so that the information that we get across is at least useful to you and you can discern amongst all the other sources of information what your perspective is on it. But let's get back to today's topic, which is one I'm super excited to talk about. It is something that I think will lead the planet into preserving Earth for future generations, which I think is probably the most important thing that we could possibly do. It started out as a grassroots movement in Africa and has since taken the world by storm and was implemented most recently in the past couple months. And I think it's going to be a very, very revolutionary project and idea and initiative. And Naturally United, as a company, we contribute to this as well in a much smaller scale. But eventually we would love to be able to do things of this scale and size. So today we're going to be talking about the 1 Trillion Tree Initiative. And this is kind of a continuation of a movement that was started by Wangari Maathai, who was the founder of the Greenbelt Movement in the 1970s, which kind of led to the Billion Tree Campaign. And so the Greenbelt Movement is a grassroots NGO that is headquartered out of Nairobi, Kenya, and they were basically just focused on environmental conservation as well as community development. And so they are founded through the National Council of Women of Kenya, and since the late 70s, they've been able to plant over 50 million trees, and they've trained 30,000 women in forestry, food processing, beekeeping, and other trades that are focused on the preservation of land as well as the preservation of resources. And so when we look at the state of trees in the world, in 2015, there was a big mapping out of all the trees around the world, and we discovered that there are around 3 trillion. And so before humans were around, there were 6 or 7 trillion, but as a result of our practices of deforestry, a lot of which is for farms that make food for animals as well as the places for the animals to dwell, we have basically cut down over half of the trees that were once on Earth. And research shows that if you were to plant 1.2 trillion trees, you would be able to counteract the emissions of CO2 from a period of 10 years. And so the World Economic Forum got together in 2020 in Davos, Switzerland, and they announced that the Trillion Tree Initiative would provide the resources through all the countries that agreed to it, along with the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which is from 2020 to 2030, seeing how much we can preserve and allow for future generations to enjoy this planet. And so this was led by the United Nations Environment Program, as well as the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, and is an initiative that I think will positively benefit people who are around in the future. And surprisingly enough, whether or not you like his politics, he's certainly taken away restrictions that were set in place to preserve the environment, but Donald Trump did sign on. The United States is one of the main funders of this program, and billions of trees have already been planted as a result of this action. So the United Nations peacekeeping missions have contributed to planting while on their field missions, as well as other people who are volunteers with the United Nations. And so I think the idea that the entire world is getting together and saying, hey, look, it's a big problem that we've cut down so many trees. Let's see what we can do to counteract that. I think it's very, very, very forward-thinking. So far, the countries that have planted the most trees are China, the United States, India, Ethiopia, Pakistan, Mexico, France, Turkey, Peru, Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt. And so those are all nations who are spearheading this effort, but there's many other people who are involved. I think that if we're very honest with ourselves, this type of action is incredibly necessary if we want people to be able to live tens of thousands of years from now. The path that we have set out the last few hundred years during the Industrial Revolution has been we can consume as much as we desire, and the needs of the people in the future will be figured out then. I think that this is a very, very interesting preemptive way of figuring out how we can preserve our planet for future generations. So I'll leave you with a quote that is directly from the Trillion Trees Initiative website. If you're looking to check that website out, it is trilliontrees.org. And I think it's an encapsulation of the message behind what this project is and also what you can expect in the future from the group of people who are bringing about such change. So here it is. Trillion Trees is a collaboration between 3 of the world's largest conservation organizations founded on a vision of a world where tree cover is expanding, not shrinking. By working together, we are leveraging our large networks and decades of experience towards a common goal. To close the gap between the aspirational commitments and the reality on the ground, our dedicated team develops ideas into opportunities and connects them to founders. Our ventures are protecting and restoring forests for the benefit of people, wildlife, and a stable climate, and aspiring sectoral change. I think that what they are doing is very admirable. I think that if there were more organizations who were focused on planting trees, that the world would be better off. Our organization has planted trees in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Our goal is to eventually have planted 3,000 by the end of this season. We planted some last season as well. But we want to do it in every state across the country and ideally every country in the world eventually. And that's kind of our initiative. That's the long-term perspective that we have taken as an organization. But beyond that, just knowing that there are projects and ideas floating around like this, I think can be beneficial for anyone who is looking to maybe positively impact the future when it comes to the environment. But beyond that, it's been a really, really bizarre time in the world. I'm aware of that. And our organization is going to do what we can to make people's lives better. That's what we intend to do at the end of the day. Let me know any way that I can help you do that. Give us a follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and soon to be TikTok. And we will see you guys very soon for episode 7 of season 3. Thank you.